as Pierre indicated, increased infrastructure development on the continent is vital for the continued economic growth on the continent. The most pressing development is required in power generation, with coal still the largest source of electricity. On the other hand, governments should be focusing on renewable energies, as there is a global focus on carbon emission mitigation and renewable energy sources as well. To take this further, we're joined in studio now by Mohammed Abdel-Rahman. He's the NEPAD Advisor of NEPAD Energy Advisor at NEPAD. All the words getting mixed up there, and we're going to be putting this discussion on the table. Thanks so much, Mohammed, for joining us this afternoon. Well, how much of a priority is renewable energy on the continent in a context where we have so many countries really grappling with a power crisis at the moment?
Well, in fact, to look at renewables within the African context, we have to consider the price and the cost issue. Most of the African countries are landlocked countries. They are depending on emergency generators to supply them with electricity. There is a financing gap, which means that a big part of the finances are expected to come from the private sector. This means that, in fact, electricity is not cheap in Africa. The conventional wisdom within the African continent is to look at the very large projects, which require extremely lots of procedures and lots of preparations to bring the private sector to participate in such activity. And within this context, we'll find that, in fact, renewables are already competitive within the African continent. Wind, small hydro, solar can be competitive in that regard.
So already competitive, where, you know, the perception to a large degree out there is that we've got countries like South Africa, like Nigeria, that are sitting on huge coal resources. And from a cost perspective, some saying, you know, does it really make sense from that cost perspective? So you're saying, yes, justified in every way.
Well, my previous answer was to the landlocked countries, those countries who don't have access to the sea. They are not endowed with coal or oil or gas, which there are plenty of them within the African continent. Definitely, when we move to South Africa, this is a challenge. When you have such huge reserves of coal, competition then becomes a very big issue. How are you going to compete? So,
because the question is, does it make sense to go down that renewable energy source when you've got a more cost-effective way of actually doing it?
Well, okay, this is you cornered me over here. Okay, economically speaking, okay, it doesn't, well, just by numbers. Okay, then the choice is clear. You go coal, but in fact, coal is a part of the solution. To meet the future energy supply, you need to have a whole mix of solutions together. You need to have fossil fuel, including coal. You'll need to have renewables. You'll need to have nuclear. You'll need to have hydro. No one solution fits all. So in fact, you need to have all this generation mix to supply your energy in the future.
To seeing these solutions come to the fore and actually take flight, I mean, is it a case of sourcing funding, or is it a regulation that is possibly not as accommodating as it should be to, you know, to allow for the entrance of viable energy resource structure, or merely governance structures within an entire supply chain that we have to deal with? Just, you know, what kind of challenges do we face here? In fact,
you mentioned the key point for renewables in what you said, which is the supply chain. The supply chain, well, look at renewables. Renewables are new in comparison to the electricity industry. The electricity industry goes back about a century or more. Renewables are within the last 20 to 30 years when we started to hear about it. The supply chain is very important, where you position yourself in order to promote the industry. Still, R&D is very active in renewables. Manufacturing is one lucrative industry if it was brought into a country like South Africa. Then finally, you have the development and the operation and maintenance. Definitely, if you can indigenize the research and development, if you can indigenize the manufacturing within the continent, it will flourish. You don't need fuel supply. You just have the air. You just have the sun. Definitely, if you manage to capture, if you go up to the supply chain, it will bring more economic benefits to the countries, and it will make it more attractive to them.
Well, we were just looking at a little earlier with Pierre, the African Development Bank going down this route of raising finance through the issuance of clean energy bonds. I mean, where money like this is successfully raised, what's being done to ensure that it actually reaches the intended targets on the value chain? Because when it comes to the continent, there's no denying that governance is a big issue.
Well, you see, if we looked at the value chain, this money that we heard the AFDB representative talking about earlier, this money goes eventually to the actual projects on the ground.
Yeah.
And there are methods to monitor, in fact, the amount of carbon that is not emitted, how much reduction of emissions, and there are formulas, and there are lots of ways to monitor that. This is a totally different debate, okay, from the governance issues. So if we talk about governance, it is the regulatory system, and in fact this is one of the challenges within the continent, to establish a strong regulatory regime within each and single country, and in fact it goes beyond the borders of the national countries. We need to have some kind of regulatory arrangements for cross-border traded energy.
Well, let's look at Kenya as an example here. I mean, where we have an active private sector within the energy space. It's very active compared to South Africa, for one. I mean, do you see an active private sector, what's needed to actually enforce renewable energy more forcefully and initiate change on the regulatory front more forcefully as well?
Well, as I said, in order to vitalize the renewable energy private sector, we'll have to look exactly what are we getting out of that private sector. If you are in a landlocked country and you are importing fuel, fuel is expensive, then fuel saving technologies, they make great sense, okay, for you. In order to vitalize this type of industry, you will have to go to either feed-in tariff, where you put a lucrative tariff for the investors to come in, or you can go even to the competitive bids, where you say you would like to have a developer that will come and develop such a plant, and then people will come and participate. In many countries, in fact, this goes even beyond just the development phase. It goes into the manufacturing. It goes into vitalizing the manufacturing industry to participate into this type of industries.
Just how diverse are African countries becoming in terms of accessing these renewable energy sources, where there are so many options? I mean, we've seen strides being made by both Kenya and Mauritius in terms of producing ethanol as an energy source. Have they taken cognizance of the fact that you cannot be reliant on one source of energy, that you've got to be diverse in your approach? I mean, the lesson that Kenya learned was a harsh one, with the lack of rainfall, proving that reliance on hydropower generation is something that cannot be, we cannot go on with that for the foreseeable future.
Yes. That's why there should be a diversified energy mix. In fact, if we just talked about renewables, if we limit our talk about renewables, the African continent, we don't have only just solar. We have solar, we have wind, we have biomass, we have geothermal in Kenya, and they already have a power plant over there. There was a meeting for the Rift Valley system, I think last month, to study how to cultivate the energy from the geothermal resources over there. So in fact, it is a very well known fact that we cannot depend on one source of energy. We must go for the full bouquet.
On that front.